It's a great pleasure to introduce our panelists today. So we have, firstly, Andreas Mace, who is Systems Librarian and Team Leader at the National Library of Sweden, who is going to be speaking about adopting open. We then have Claire Knowles, who is a member of the library executive team at the library at the University of Leeds. And we then have Agustina Martinez Garcia, who is head of open research systems at the University of Cambridge. As we hear from each of our panelists, so they are each going to be speaking for about 10 minutes, we're going to explore a number of themes. So exploring the diverse experiences in adopting and implementing open digital systems and standards in research libraries, exploring the challenges and opportunities of moving from pilot projects to sustainable community-supported practices, and engaging and encouraging collaboration among our attendees by highlighting some of the lessons learned through the different initiatives that our panelists have been involved in. So that's a quick introduction to today's session. And it's a real pleasure at this point to invite the first of our speakers, Andreas Mace, to come on screen. And just while he's doing that, I will quickly introduce Andreas. So Andreas is a systems librarian and team leader at the National Library of Sweden, currently working mostly with metadata related to workflows and implementing Folio and Viewfind at the library. He has extensive experience of library open source software, previously been active in the Cohart and Coral communities, both in Sweden and internationally. And Andreas, over to you for your presentation.
Hopefully you can all hear me. I'm going to be talking about adopting open and focusing on the National Library of Sweden's implementation of a new LSP that we've been working on. I'm going to give you some more details about that during this little presentation. First, just a quick introduction to the National Library of Sweden. I'm not going to go through all of these bullet points. You can read them yourself. But the most important one is probably the one at the top, that we are both a government agency and works as a library. So we are both responsible for working with all libraries in Sweden as an agency, a government agency, but also we're a library that has circulation and acquisition and all of that. I also want to highlight the bullet point at the very bottom, which is to say that we are developing Libris, our national union catalog, which is using linked open data. So we have BibFrame in production and have had that since 2018, probably one of the first in the world to do that. And open various ways of open is very important in National Libraries. We work with open access, open data in several ways, and more also open source, which is what I'll be mostly focusing on in this presentation. We've had our current system. We are not live yet. We are in the middle of implementing our new LSP. We've had our old system, Aleph from Ex Libris, for a very long time, for around 25 years now. And it's been apparent that we are more and more stuck in the old system. It's a system lock-in where it's difficult to maintain host and support that solution, and our workflows are very much stuck to how it's been in the old system, which is also based a lot on workflows based from the card catalogs, really old workflows that are hard to change in this old legacy system. So we've been looking almost the last 10 years saying that we need to change this and go for something else, but it's taken a long time, and we'll always have a lot of other big projects going on. Oh, and I should also mention I use the NLS, which in this case obviously refers to National Library of Sweden and not Scotland, which I think you are used to in this context. Just to highlight that. So we needed a new solution. To narrow it down a little bit, we of course had tons and tons of requirements of a new system, but these are the high-level requirements that we have. The first one was that we wanted to host it locally. We didn't want a cloud-based solution, which is the common way of managing library systems right now, at least in the proprietary world. This is primarily that this is a crucial system that we want to have control of ourselves, but also that there are data security and data privacy laws that regulate how this can be used, both within the European Union and even stricter laws in Sweden, which basically prevents us from using cloud-based solutions. The second bullet point is, as I mentioned, we've been working with Libris, our national union catalog, which we develop ourselves. It's open source as well, freely available on GitHub. It's a platform and a linked data editor. It's highly important, and we more and more want to use linked open data in and between our various systems at the National Library of Sweden. And obviously, we want the same in our local LSP for us as a library, not an agency. We are aware that it doesn't really exist, or hardly at least in the market, that there are software that has support for linked data, but we at least wanted a system that were not dependent on Mark 21, that wasn't built around and is stuck in Mark 21. And also the last bullet point is we wanted to move towards open source, which is kind of the basics of this today's session. And that's several reasons. One is mentioned here for us to be less dependent on single vendors, but also to encourage staff empowerment, managing more of the library systems ourselves and getting staff involved in that. So our question was basically, is there such an ILS or LSP on the market? It's time to broaden the view a little bit when talking about the market. So we started looking at the marketplace. It's a little bit interesting, at least for the academic sector in Sweden, that the use of open source LSPs or ILS is unusually high. I would say it's really sticks out internationally as well. It's about 50% that use open source software, including 3 of the 4 biggest universities in Sweden have an open source ILS or LSP, COA or Folio. Interestingly, this is similar in Finland, where about 40% are using open source in the academic marketplace. While in Denmark, Norway, and Iceland, it's the complete opposite. It's around 0%. They're all using proprietary solutions. But going back to our actual work at the National Library of Sweden, we didn't just want to, we worked a lot with workflows, so we didn't want to just bring over processes and workflows from the old system, but rather look at all of them and see where we can make changes or where there are frustrations and so forth, so we can try at least to move into a new system that has better support for how we would like our workflows to look. So we've been spending a lot of time reviewing and modeling our processes for a bunch of things as listed here. Loans, interlibrary loans, acquisition, user management, digitization, etc. We've done, I think, around 60 of these, and they're quite time consuming and take a lot of staff time. So we really dug into our workflows. And here is an example of a flow chart of the workflow analysis we have. In this case, it's reading room circulation, which is a big thing at the National Library of Sweden, where most of the material we have is in closed stacks that can't leave the actual building. You need to read it in the reading room, and we need a workflow that supports this. So everything at the swim lanes at the top are interactions, and the gray bars at the bottom are the systems that are involved. So the software interactions that staff or processes have. So we have these kind of flow charts for a lot of our workflows. And it's been very helpful when we started working on moving into a new system. But for us, it's not only one system that needs to change. We've had Aleph for 25 years, so we more or less built an entire ecosystem around it. This is an attempt to visualize this. The thickness of the arrows indicates the complexity of the integration. Um, we lovingly call this one the squid. I'm sure other libraries have similar solutions where they, at least when you have had the same system for a long time, you built applications, helper applications, scripts, other software that interacts or helps in some way. So we are not just looking at changing one system, but a lot of them at the same time, or at least work with a lot of integrations. And the most important integrations are the ones highlighted here. Libris, as I mentioned, where we create and manage our metadata. We have Primo, our current discovery system, and SFX, our current knowledge base link resolver. That's the most important integrations that we are working with. So, in the end, what did we decide? We went with the open source solutions, the open source pathway, and we made a strategic decision in 2023 to look really closely at these, and then made a final decision a year later to, yes, we would implement Folio as our new LSP and use WooFind as our discovery system. And our implementation project started properly in March of last year. We have some implementation considerations that might be interesting to review. And as I mentioned, we will be in-house hosting this on-premise at the National Libraries of Sweden in Stockholm. But we want to do a lot of things ourselves, but not entirely. We also have tendered a service provider with expertise in both Folio and WooFind to help us with things like development, data migration, setups, and support, and various other things. And that's index data, one that procurement. We have also clearly separated how we're going to manage development, where our own internal development teams will focus on all of these integrations I showed you earlier in the squid, which is quite a lot. But if we want or need functionality to be built or customizations be managed in WooFind or Folio, that will be done together with index data and their developers. We haven't yet, but we will also procure a knowledge base, link resolver, and some sort of discovery index to work with WooFind. We've tested and verified that both solutions from EBSCO and Ex Libris work with WooFind in the way we intend. So we just need to do this actual procurement. Finally, looking forward, what we're doing right now and will be working with soon, as we aim to go live sometime in the first half of next year, is the actual implementation phase with our consultants, which is building the infrastructure. We've recently gotten the hardware set up so that we will host these systems on. We're working on data migrations, adapting workflows, or looking at workflows in Folio and maybe also in WooFind as well. We have some development activities. We have work with support for linked data, which will hopefully happen in Folio that we can use. We are developing some things together with index data to have functionality for reading room circulation in the way that we need. And we're working a lot with the community engagement, both in Sweden. You saw that we have colleagues from Chalmers here, which is very nice. But we also have Linköping University, who's also live with Folio in Sweden. And there's various other libraries that are together with a national agency looking at potentially hosting Folio for more libraries as well. So there's a lot of interest in Folio and other open source systems in Sweden at the moment. And we're also working internationally in the larger communities, mostly with Folio, but also a little bit with WooFind. That was my short introduction to what we've been working on. You can email me questions afterwards in case you have them, or keep them to the end of this webinar.
Andreas, thank you. That was fantastic and a great overview. And I'm particularly impressed and particularly intrigued by what you said about the extent of use in Sweden of open source by libraries there, which is yeah, as you say, is very different to some other countries and very impressive.
Yeah.
If you have questions for Andreas, do post them in the Q&A function and put them forward, and we will feed those into the Q&A session at the end of the three presentations. What we're going to do at this point is I'm going to invite Claire Knowles, our second speaker, to come on screen now. Claire is going to be speaking around the theme of implementing open. And Claire is a member of the library executive team at the University of Leeds Library, where she provides strategic leadership for the library research services encompassing open research, repositories, research data management, bibliometrics, and open access funder compliance. In addition, Claire is the product owner of the library's IT systems and serves as the project lead for the Digital Library Infrastructure Project. She's also the co-convener of RLUK Digital Shift Working Group alongside myself, and in addition is a member of the IIIF Executive Committee. So over to you, Claire.
Thanks, Tom, and thank you everyone for coming today. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about our adoption of open standards and infrastructure here at the University of Leeds. So I'm going to talk about the context and decision-making behind our adoption of open for a strategic library project, the one that Tom's just mentioned, the Digital Library Infrastructure Project. And this project underpins one of our strategic priorities, SP4, and particularly that bit in the middle about our digital library infrastructure. So it's very much underpinning one of our strategic priorities in our vision for 2030 here at Leeds. So what is the Digital Library Infrastructure Project, or DLIP, as we've called it, because we all have an acronym, don't we? It is around improving the search, access and use of our university's rare and unique items, our cultural collections, and that for their use in learning, research and collaboration. It's to deliver resilient cloud-based, so a bit of a difference there from our previous speaker, technological infrastructure and adopting open solutions and standards. It's a 4-year project, so we're currently coming into year 2 of that project. The halfway mark will be around the summer. And it is part of the university's digital transformation programme, so it's very much an institutional project being led here in the library. So underpinning the project are 8 core principles, and I'm going to focus on 3 of those about our adoption of open. So those are that the project is standards driven. So we adopt the standards of the sector wherever possible. We don't create our own. And this is to promote best practice and support interoperability, because we know that a lot of the value of our collections comes when you can bring them together above the institution. The next one is that collaborative nature. So we encourage and nurture collaboration, and that's both internally, so within project teams, with research, with teaching, and external partners. We want our infrastructure to be resilient, modular, and sustainable. So we want to make sure that we're building for the long term and keeping things safe. And this is to create a foundation for future change and research, particularly around digital humanities and value for money, and also looking forward towards net zero. So why have we adopted open standards? And part of this is because of the lifespan of our collections. As we all know, the collections that we have and are trusted to look after will live longer than myself and longer than our systems and infrastructure. So how do we make sure we're looking after things in the long term? And this goes on to digital preservation, but also content migration, etc. The growth of our collections, they are growing, particularly our cultural collections, and they will continue to grow as we digitise more. And part of the project is increasing our digitisation, but also as more content comes in as born digital to our cultural collections. And then again, the interconnectivity of our collections. By adopting the same standards as others, we enable our collections to be brought together above, both through aggregators, research project, teaching, etc. So therefore, we've adopted open to reduce content migration. Very much if we got the right standards there, systems can change above them, similar to what we have just heard about with those standards. To be system agnostic storage, and standards that, in theory, if we keep the standards right, we should be able to change the systems, and we haven't got to do big data migrations, big changes of that. And that helps keep it safe on that digital preservation stance as well. The fewer times we touch the data, the more likely we are to corrupt it or miss things as we do migrations. And then those standards, again, for interconnectivity. So the project is very much standards driven. It's what's driving us through, and what the significant endpoints are for our users will all be standards driven. So we'll be able to do new and interesting things for using those standards. And that also helps with training, adoption, and making sure that people understand how they can do things with our collections, in collections as data, etc., when we get to that stage. So part of when looking at what standards we adopt, and also software, was how we assess that. And we wanted to make sure that we were doing that in a way to reduce the risk of adoption, to make sure that they are standards that we will have for the long term. We all know that new standards may well be coming along at some point, but how can we make sure that we're adopting things that will last, where there's community buy-in, where there's people we can learn from and talk to find out more, where is that level of engagement, that the things are already being looked at and there's a vibrant community, where are the support models, where there's opportunity for us to get involved through membership and through involvement in governance. As Tom said at the start, I'm a member of the RLUK outreach group, so it's how can we get involved with people to make sure that we're adopting them and the community continues to thrive. And where is the documentation? Access to source code, or also the standards documentation for the standards, and it's actively maintained. It's not sort of been there gathering dust on GitHub. So there's three main standards that we've adopted as part of DLIP. So the first one is the International Image Interoperability Framework, or IIIF, and this is for access to our digitized content and born digital content. And sort of looking through this table, which covers the first three of those points, there's over 130 implementations of IIIF with over 1 billion images. So we know it's been adopted lots, it's an active community, and that people are using it. It's maintained by CLIA in the US, that's where the members of staff are based, and it's got a membership model with over 67 members, and we did join IIIF as part of the project. And yes, as I said, we've joined, and there's regular community groups and ways for us to get involved and understand more about the system and get that support both on the technical and the community. So for our content storage, so that's our sort of files when they're sat there at rest, we have adopted the Oxford Common File Layout, OCFL, and that is implemented in the Fedora repository. So we're adopting OCFL via the Fedora repository, and that's used by over 300 institutions worldwide. Again, it's got an open community meetings. It's managed by Lyrasis, again in the US, and that Lyrasis members for Fedora is over 40 members. So we can see, again, it's well used. It's been going through its migrations. It's been kept up to date. And there's the Fedora repository and the suppliers who support it as well. And then the new standard to us, and then the newest standard out of these three, is linked to art, which came about through the art community, but it can be used for other content as well. And this is for our metadata. So we are mapping our metadata to linked art, which is a subset of the CDOC CRM, which is an ISO standard from 2006. So even though linked art is relatively new, it's just announced version 1, it is a subset of a standard that's been around for a long time and has got wide adoption. There's over 20 institutions participating in linked art development and adoption. And again, they have fortnightly community calls. So you can see for all of these, they're active communities. And that's one of the reasons we adopted them through the adoption levels, but also the communities. So open source software. I recently saw this quote posted by Rosalind Metz on her LinkedIn. Open source is free like a puppy is free. So yeah, open source needs looking after. It's not something that you just install it and it ticks away and it doesn't cost you anything. It's got the total cost of ownership, similar to those supplier and proprietary systems that we may purchase. We need to look at selection, as I've just said. What do we choose? How do we go about it? We need to then acquire it. Is that through partnerships? Is that by installing it? Is that memberships, etc.? The implementation costs. may well be different because you're doing it locally, or again, you might pay a supplier to do it than purchasing, but it's still got significant implementation costs and keeping that installed, configured. Then there's the use, monitoring the system, maintenance, support, and as we're all very aware, making sure it's safe and secure through the cybersecurity. And then retiring. What are you going to do? What are you going to migrate to? So I'm going back around the circle, back to the selection and requirements, etc. And as Andreas said, integrations with your other systems to make sure your data is all linked. These 5 points I've taken from a report from 2011, which is available via Alice's ePrints. So when looking at open source software that we were going to adopt, we've made sure we've done that in alignment with the university's IT architectural principles here at Leeds. And that's very much looking at when can we buy before build and when can we configure, not customize. Yeah. Many of us know the more customization you do, the harder it is to migrate, the harder it is to upgrade, etc. Where are things highly configurable so you can make them institutionally for you? Where can you configure those for your processes? Lovely process diagrams there from National Library of Sweden. Therefore, with our adoption of open, we are, where possible, working in partnership with suppliers. So we are working with Digirati and especially using their AAAF cloud services for our AAAF endpoints, and also they're working with us on Fedora and OCFL. And those again need to be integrated and partnered with links to our systems here at the University of Leeds. And we're also working with other institutions where possible, for example, with the Getty and Yale on our linked art mapping and implementation. So they've shared some of their code with us via their GitHub, so we can use that and map that to what we're doing. So last of all, I just want to say huge thanks to everybody who's working on the project here at Leeds across different services, and to those who have answered emails and texts and calls, etc., for me, finding about their adoption of open, in particular to these institutions who've had numerous calls and meetings with us. Thank you.
Claire, thank you very much. That was fantastic. And I am very intrigued with some of the perhaps slight differences in approach that have already come through in the two panelists who we've heard from. So I think that suggests some quite interesting things that we will explore in the Q&A section. Do keep adding your questions to the Q&A function, as I can see a number of you have done already. But I'd just like to invite our third speaker to come on screen now. So I can see our slides are just coming through there. So I'd just like to welcome Agustina Martinez Garcia, who is the head of Open Research Systems at Cambridge University Library, where she leads the Open Research Systems team and is also responsible for the development of open research infrastructure as part of the wider university open research programme. Her role also involves leading the development of Cambridge's institutional repository, which is a locally developed DSpace repository. And she's a strong advocate of open source technologies and the role they play in wider open research and scholarly ecosystems. So over to you, Agustina.
Thank you, Tom, for the introduction, and I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about supporting open and share some of the examples we have at the libraries when working with open source initiatives. So as a quick outline, I'd like to talk to give you a little bit of a background first on key systems using open source at the libraries, followed by introducing the main areas that we think will make open source successful. And then I'll go and talk into detail more about the systems that we use that rely on open source platforms. And then we'll finish with very briefly telling you a little bit about the key benefits and challenges that we see in working with open source through the years of experience at the library. In terms of a quick background, at the libraries, we've been supporting open source in various forms for a long time now, either using existing open source platforms and developing and maintaining them in-house, or as completely in-house developed platforms that we then try to release as open source where possible. Key library systems built and developed open source, they cover a range of areas, starting from open research and open access, support for digital humanities and open research, as well as areas like digital archives and preservation. And you have here a timeline of with some examples of the key systems I'll be talking about a bit more in detail later today. In terms of, before talking in detail about those systems, I wanted to talk a bit about 3 areas that are really critical when it comes into successfully supporting open source. That is governance, community, and sustainability. They are highly interconnected. For example, good governance fosters a strong community, which in turn can support project sustainability. Likewise, a sustainable project attracts and retains a vibrant community, and then the community benefits from having a effective governance. In terms of governance, it is critical that there is a clearly defined governance structure for the initiative, and this involves normally establishing clear structures and processes for decision making, as well as strategic planning, and then community. Having diverse and inclusive communities and including users, developers, service providers is really critical to continuously improve and expand open source software. The other important area is sustainability. It's all about ensuring the long-term health and success of open source projects. And for this, it's very important to consider funding models and resourcing, having a very engaged community, having appropriate infrastructure, and then the ability for the open initiative to adapt and innovate as community needs change over time and technologies evolve as well. And now I'd like to then briefly talk about 3 use cases we have of supporting open source at the library, and I'll try to cover the work we do in relation to those 3 areas that I've just introduced earlier: governance, community, and sustainability. I'll start with Apollo. It's the system that I know best. It's a key university system to support open research, open access, and funder compliance. As I introduced, it's based on the DSpace open source software. And one of the areas we value the most when working with this platform is that it's highly interoperable and it's very well integrated with key systems that we use internally or we develop as well. And that is mostly to support open access and research workflows. It's also very well integrated externally with relevant systems within the wider scholarly and research ecosystem, which in this context is very important for us. I'd like to talk a little bit about sustainability and how we contribute to the sustainability of the DSpace initiative. We do this in a number of ways. First, we annually subscribe institutionally to we have a membership. We've also in the past funded specific features to be developed as well, and that has been quite important. And we also are developing successful bits to further enhance the software, as well as integrating it with other platforms. How do we actively participate in the community and in DSpace governance? Having an institutional membership gives us actually access to DSpace governance, and we hold a seat on both steering and leadership groups, and they really help us setting the strategic direction of the initiative, and we are able to propose and agree at the technical direction and software roadmaps. In addition to those governance structures, there is also a national level network of user groups. In my case, I co-chair the UK and Ireland user group, which brings together institutions across the UK and Ireland that use DSpace. And it's a very good forum for sharing perspectives, ideas, issues, and then more importantly, I'm able then to feed back to DSpace's general governance about those issues and needs of the UK and Ireland's specific community. Then I'd like to talk next about CUDL, Cambridge University Digital Library. It's been entirely developed in-house since 2010. It uses open source technologies, and it's been released open source to the wider community in 2020. Since then, 2 additional institutions are using it and contributing to its development. That is Manchester and Lancaster, and several other institutions are showing interest and considering adopting it, which is great news. In addition to being open source, it also supports and makes use of open community standards such as IIIF for the images hosted in the platform, as well as supporting transcriptions using TEI, the Text Encoding Initiative. So again, another open standard. And to relate back to governance, The project takes a lightweight approach to governance, which is proven quite useful as it helps with the speeding up decision making and focus on the technical development. We hold monthly developer forums, and they allow developers to actively share progress on things and ideas. And in terms of project governance, there is a project board and a steering group committee to set the strategic direction and steer the technical development of the platform. And then lastly, the other system I wanted to talk about is the Digital Preservation Service. It's part of a wider libraries digital preservation program, and we are about now 17 months. We have 17 months left in the program. This is a central service for the long-term storage and management of the library's digital assets and collections, and it is being developed mostly using open source technologies and open standards. Development and maintenance follow a DevOps approach, and the infrastructure is hosted in the cloud, and it is integrated with cloud-native serverless workflows to support ingest and preservation actions. In terms of governance and community participation, the digital preservation team participates in the Fedora governance through a community seat. And this governance structure is very similar to the one I described for this space and allows us to contribute to setting, again, the strategic direction of the initiative, as well as overseeing and agreeing the technical development. And then I wanted to finish by talking about the key benefits and challenges that we see with our experience over the years on working with open source. I'll start with the benefits. The main one is really the ability to set a strategic direction through active participation in the community. We can really influence the strategic direction of the software and ensure that the user needs are met. This is normally much more difficult when working with closed solutions or vendors. Then another one really important for us is meeting institutional needs. We work with when we work with open solutions means that we can be responsive to changes needed to meet our user needs and respond to changing requirements as well. This is particularly true in the open research area, where the landscape and funders and policy requirements change very rapidly. Another very important benefit is fostering collaboration and contributing to the global community. When we work with open source, it brings in diverse perspectives really and increases shared knowledge and facilitates rapid development. Long-term sustainability, very important as well. When working with open source solutions, we are not dependent on the vendor existing or having funds to cover licensing fees, for example. Innovation, interoperability, and adaptability, very important as well. Innovation in open source really is often driven by the needs and feedback of the community, and that is very important. Open source software is designed by default with interoperability in mind and to be compatible with a wide range of systems and technologies. And then I'd like to finish by talking a bit about the challenges. The first one, I'm sure you'll be mostly familiar with, is around resourcing and having developers. When working with open source in-house can be very challenging to find and keep developers, as it is very difficult to compete with industry salaries. Responsiveness in terms of the development, often open source relies on the work of volunteers, and there are a lot of open areas for development. And this translates often on longer times waiting for bug fixes or for features to be released. Although one can say that this is also applicable to commercial, as vendor priorities do not always match those of the community. Open source licensing is another challenge. There are a wide range of different licenses, and it's important to be aware of any restrictions, requirements, and compatibility when using open source code in your projects. And then lastly, flexibility versus maintainability. Claire touched upon this a little bit when talking about you don't want to customize too much. So it's important to have a careful balance of system customizations to meet your local needs versus making it much easier for future upgrades and maintenance of the open source systems. And yeah, I'd like to leave it at that. And thank you very much. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Agustina. That was a fantastic overview, and again, a really different perspective on things from a different institution. Great to hear you mention the work around Cambridge University Digital Library that I was involved in at Lancaster University at my previous institution that I worked at. So yeah, really welcome to see that represented. I'd just like to invite, in fact, I can see now, we have all of our panelists on the screens. So for the final time of today's session, we'll be running up until 3 p.m. and we will be using that for Q&A. We've got quite a few questions that you've been asking that have come through the Q&A function. Just to say that if we don't get time to cover all of those, we will come back and post some written responses to those. We'll be asking our panelists to consider those further and to come back with some responses. But just to kick things off, I am just going to pick one of the questions that we've had from our audience as a bit of an opener. This is a really interesting question, and is in certain respects a real challenge to the heart of open source. So one of our audience members has said, the more I hear about open source, the more it appears to be bureaucratic, almost esoteric. It looks expensive, technocratic. And given my frustration, what would win me over to open source in libraries? So would any of our panelists like to comment on how they might respond to that and what they might say to win somebody around to open source?
Well, I can start. I think also Agustina mentioned a bunch of good things just at the end of her talk there, like around the strategic direction of software, etc., where it's much more easy to influence an open source software than a proprietary one. But I would say, at least from my perspective, working a lot with the library service platforms and similar software, is again the workflows where the property systems, especially the cloud-based ones, are very much focused on a few very specific workflows that are pretty much rigid, because that's the whole idea of software as a service. It needs to be similar for every client. So if your preferred workflow doesn't fit in that, then you either need to comply with how the system works or do workarounds or find another system. You can't work and develop your workflows. You can't work with UX in libraries in a very good way if your software is proprietary and very far away, removed from that. So that, I would say, is one of the really great benefits of being able to work with it. And together with that, empowering staff to actually get engaged and figure out what they like about the system. You don't just send in a support ticket that this is wrong or something is bad. Rather thinking, how do we actually change this? How do we fix something to work the way we would want it to work at our library, not in a way that was specified by a library software provider 10 years ago when they did the basic research for that function.
Great, thank you. Claire, you've got your hand up. Did you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, so one of the other systems that we run here at the University of Leeds is our White Rose repositories that we do as a consortium, and that is the University of Leeds, York and Sheffield. So that is a way that we can collaborate on open source and purchasing. You can buy as a consortium. We don't tend to do it often in the UK, but you can do. But I think for us, that is where we can collectively share those technical costs together. We've been running ePrints here for over 20 years. It's run here in Leeds, and the technical infrastructure and the developer is based here, but we share that staffing resource as well. The staffing resource for the White Rose Libraries is in York, but that's also where we come together as a community and we talk about that and how we're going to do in a very close, open way. And you can do that, as we all know, with vendor systems. But for us, that works really well, working as a consortium together and sharing those costs between the three of us. And we haven't got to pay, well, we haven't got any license costs, but, you know, the things that we do as a consortium because of that. So I think that's, you know, an example that really works for us here.
Thanks, Claire. Agustina, what's your response to this one?
Yeah, I was gonna highlight again the community for us, like, you know, being able to work with such a big community. I'm talking specifically, for example, our experience with the DSpace community and the ability as well to work with global, community, and coming with different perspectives and different priorities. But more importantly, to be able to set that direction and make sure that the software going forward goes into a direction that helps you meeting your needs is really the main one. And yeah, you can have communities with vendors as well, but my experience is not the same as when working with an open community. The other big advantage is about the collaboration opportunities. We've been able, by working with an open community, we've been able actually to work collaboratively with a number of institutions, bringing in successful funding to further enhance the open platforms. And those are really great ways to contribute to the long-term sustainability of such fantastic initiatives.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'd just like to move us on at this point and just delve into a little bit of the detail. This is specifically, Andreas, around your presentation, and we've had couple of questions around your reasons for selecting Folio and what you get out of it. So one of those, mentioning the fact that Koha is quite prevalent in academic libraries, and what did Folio offer that Koha doesn't? And also, if there is anything that you can say about with Folio, what do you think has developed well in recent years? And are there areas where there is more evolution or more progress required for Folio, things that it doesn't currently do that you are looking for them to do?
Yeah, sure. Regarding the last part, obviously there's more areas because it's still a pretty young system. It's the areas where it's developing. Because Folio is basically a platform with modules that has apps connected to them, and there's recently been one introduced for serials, managing prediction patterns and things like that, which probably needs to be developed further in further releases as well. But I think it's progressing nicely in a lot of ways. For us, the linked data question was what really set it out from Koha, which I used to work with Koha. I like that software a lot, but it's very mark-centric. It's functions in the system is based around that there needs to be mark. And for us, that was an issue. But other libraries there's other things as well. Folio, obviously, as a new system, has a much more modern infrastructure and architecture than Koha does. Koha didn't have ERM. It does now, but didn't for a long time, where you need to add Coral or something similar to work with it for your ERM resources. So that was probably one reason why other libraries in Sweden chose Folio. But usually I would always say that each library need to look at their needs and investigate and evaluate what software works best for them. And some would say, okay, Koha works better for us. And another library with slightly different needs might say, oh, Folio is much better fit for us. Or a proprietary solution for that matter. Because that's one of my key points I always bring up is like the choice. Libraries need to have choice in software. The consolidation of the marketplace is a huge problem. And that each library needs to at least do the high level requirements and then change based on that rather than just procuring new systems because they work well with their old vendor, etc. New software might not necessarily fit as well as your old one did. So I'd say that it's up to each library, but and yeah, it's interesting the evolution of open source in Sweden and Finland.
That's great.
Especially
Thank
for
you.
academics.
Claire, this is one for you. So we have a question about linked art that you mentioned in your presentation. And is there more that you can say about what that offers specifically that either improves discoverability or makes you digitally more sophisticated?
Yeah, so linked art is also linked to open data. So it enables those connections to be made, and it does lots of connections to authority terms. So, and that's a big thing that we're working through at the moment is those links to the Getty terms and others to make sure that we can create those connections so that it's a mapping exercise that we're going through. There's a number of places that have adopted it, and you can see it behind their websites. and there's usually links where you can go and click on it, and that is the Getty. The Rijksmuseum Collections website was recently relaunched, and that's powered by Linked Art. And one of the biggest examples is Yale's LUKS platform, and that uses Linked Art to bring together collections from lots of different types. So it's got the Peabody and the Yale Centre for British Art, content coming from their libraries, etc. So it's content agnostic from that sense that it can bring together for a sort of one collection approach. And yes, so that's one of the reasons we're looking at adopting it, and to get that linked data mechanism so we can do different types of searching within our collections. Well, when I say we can enable our users to do so.
Great, thank you. So we are in just the final few minutes now, and I'd just like to take a moment just for us to briefly explore perhaps a divergence of approach that we saw in a couple of the presentations. So Andreas, you talked about using on-premise local hosting. Claire, you talked about cloud hosting being kind of built into the strategic approach, and it'd be really interesting to hear a little more of the reasons why you've taken those different approaches. So Claire, as you're still on screen, is there's something that you could add about why you've gone down the the cloud route specifically, and why that was a strategic choice from the outset?
Yeah, so that's very much for us to sort of leverage what we can get with the cloud, and to also do sort of high computational things at certain points. So for example, with our digital content, we might want to go over it and do Oxbow, doing character recognition, OCR, tripping over my acronyms. So it's one of those things that we could run that at that time and not keep physical infrastructure running all the time, to be able to do those sort of resources, and to be able to sort of scale up without sort of, I suppose, buying the equipment to do that. So it's very much what we're looking at is moving things to the cloud, and that is across, a lot of our systems and storage here at the University of Leeds. So that was the sort of way that we wanted to go forward, to sort of leverage the cloud.
Great, thank you. Andreas, what were your reasons for focusing on local hosting?
Well, as mentioned, it was the data privacy issues was a huge concern, and it matters a lot, I think, what kind of data you have in your software. Where some of them, where it's not private data in any way, sensitive data, that's something that could work in the cloud. But for us with LSP, we have some EU laws like GDPR that's not really blocking for using cloud-based solutions, but we have a Swedish law, the Public and Privacy Act, which is much stricter, where library data, at least circulation history, is deemed as classified data that you really shouldn't have outside of Sweden if you can't control third country data transfers, which you basically can't do in a cloud-based solution, at least not in AWS or Azure or anything like that. You have no idea where the data is moving to and fro, even if the providers can tell you something, you don't know, basically. So it depends a lot on what type of data you have, and the use cases, as Claire mentioned, some sort of computational aspects might be very useful to use cloud-based solutions. For Libris, we do host it ourselves as well, but it could be in a cloud-based solution because it's open metadata that's available for everyone. There's no personal data in there anywhere, so that could be somewhere else. So it matters a lot what type of software you use and what kind of data you have, basically.
Great, thank you. We are right up to time, so Agustina, I will just let you have the final word if there's anything you wanted to add on the topic of local or cloud hosting.
Yeah, very briefly, we follow a mixed approach, actually. I mentioned briefly in the presentation that for the digital preservation program, we're actually looking at a completely cloud-hosted approach for that. And it comes with the benefits of the computation, as well as like the fast response. And then for some of the other systems, we are still considering, because of the nature of the data, to actually keep them on-prem. And then, so yeah, it's similar. It's a mixture of both approaches. Thank you.